Sira stood outside the compound in Ralumo with her small bag pressed to her chest and the cold night settling around her. She kept thinking about the voices that had pushed her out, voices that once called her family. The door had closed so fast it felt like the whole house had turned its back on her at the same time. She tried to breathe slowly, but every breath came out shaky. The road ahead looked darker than she expected, and she almost laughed at how life could change in a single moment. She told herself she would figure things out later and began walking, letting the gravel bite her feet because stopping felt worse than the pain. For a moment she wondered what her mother in faraway Kelanu would say if she saw her now, wandering in the night with a heart that felt too heavy. A faint light grew behind her, then a car slowed beside her. She froze until the window slid down and she saw a familiar face. It was Laro, the friend who used to race her through mango fields when they were young. He called her name with the same warm, teasing voice she remembered, and something inside her broke open. She climbed in, and before she could stop herself, the tears came. Laro said nothing, just drove through the quiet streets like he had all the time in the world to listen. By the time they reached his home in Mavari, she felt the smallest spark of safety return. She looked at him and let out a soft, tired laugh. Losing a place she thought she belonged had shaken her, but being found on that lonely road made her believe she could start again. Sira walked toward the main road with her small bag bumping against her hip and the night air clinging to her skin like cold smoke. She kept telling herself she would figure out where to sleep once she reached the highway, but even she didn't believe those words. The gravel pricked her soles through her thin sandals, and the wind kept stinging her eyes until she couldn't tell if the tears were from the pain or from everything falling apart. She tried to think clearly to hold herself together, but her mind kept drifting back to Kelanu, to her mother's warm kitchen and the soft humming that filled the mornings. She remembered why she left home in the first place, how she had followed love all the way to Ralumo with a heart full of hope, believing she was building a new life. Now that life had collapsed in a single evening, and she felt like a stranger to her own choices. She let out a small laugh, the kind that escapes when sadness becomes too heavy, and the sound startled her in the quiet. It felt strange to hear her own voice in the dark, like she was reminding herself she was still here, still moving. The road ahead stretched long and empty, only a thin moon lighting the path. She imagined her mother's face if she knew her daughter was wandering a strange town at night with nowhere to go. Part of her wanted to turn around, knock on the compound door, and pretend none of it had happened. But she knew that chapter was finished, even if her heart had not caught up yet. Every step felt like she was walking away from a version of herself she no longer recognized. She thought about her fiancé's mother calling her ungrateful, about the sudden shift in their eyes, the way affection vanished like mist. She wondered how love could turn so fast, how a home could become a place of exile in a single heartbeat. For a moment she pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady the ache. The night smelled of dust and distant cooking fires, and the silence around her felt wide enough to swallow her whole. As she reached a bend in the road, the clouds pulled apart and a soft stripe of moonlight lit the way. She breathed it in slowly, and the air finally felt gentle. She remembered long walks in Kelanu with her cousin Zami, how they would talk about dreams they were sure would come true. She wondered what Zami would say now. Probably something simple, something kind, like telling her she wasn't broken just because things didn't work out. The thought warmed her, and she felt a small glow of strength rise inside her. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she was still moving. And maybe that was enough for tonight. The wind softened as she neared the main road. She could hear distant traffic, the steady hum of life continuing somewhere ahead. She lifted her head and let the night settle around her without fear. She didn't know what waited for her, but she knew she didn't want to go back. She took one long breath, wiped her cheeks, and kept walking toward whatever light might find her next. Headlights slid across Sira's legs like a slow warning, and she froze in the middle of the dusty roadside. The car rolled to a stop beside her, its engine humming low, and for a moment she could only hear her own heartbeat pounding against her ears. She didn't know whether to run into the bushes or keep standing there like a lost child. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as the window began to lower. Then she saw a face she thought she might only ever meet again in old memories. Tavio, the boy who used to race her up the mango hills of Kelanu, the one who left for Mavari so long ago that she sometimes wondered if she had imagined their friendship. The same soft eyes, the same gentle mischief at the corner of his mouth, as if he already knew she was in trouble before she said a word. He called her name, slow and careful, and the sound cracked something in her chest. She tried to answer when he asked why she was walking alone this late, but her throat tightened until no sound could pass. All the anger from the evening, all the shame, all the fear she had been holding together with shaky breath suddenly felt too heavy to lift. Tavio stepped out of the car without saying anything else and walked around to her side. The gravel crunched under his shoes in a familiar rhythm, and somehow that alone made her eyes burn. He stopped a small distance from her, giving her space, like he remembered she never liked being crowded when upset. The moonlight caught on his face, and for a moment she saw the boy who used to tease her for crying during story nights, then hand her a mango to cheer her up. She let out a tiny laugh, the kind that slips out when sadness twists into something too sharp to swallow. He heard it and raised one eyebrow like he always did when he wanted her to know she wasn't hiding anything. She shook her head, covered her face with her hands for a moment, and then finally whispered his name. He didn't push. He didn't pry. He simply opened the passenger door, a quiet invitation, as if to say she didn't owe him explanations until she was ready. When she sat down in the car, the warmth of the seat felt like a small mercy. The world outside was still dark, but inside the car she felt a tiny spark of safety. The engine's soft rumble steadied her breathing. She stared out the window, watching the shapes of trees blur past as Tavio began to drive slowly, like he was giving her time to gather herself. He told her he had only come to Ralumo to deliver tools for his uncle and never planned to pass this road at this hour. He laughed under his breath and said something in him told him to slow down when he saw a figure walking alone. She wondered if life had a way of placing the right people at the right bends, even when everything felt lost. Her voice finally came back in a thin, trembling stream. She told him she had nowhere to go tonight. His hands tightened lightly on the wheel, not in worry but in something like determination. He told her she wasn't alone, not tonight, not on his watch. And for the first time since the door slammed behind her, Sira felt the night soften around her, as if hope had climbed quietly into the car too. Sira tried to hold herself together, but once the car settled into the quiet stretch of road, the tears slipped out before she could stop them. They fell fast, warm on her cheeks, and she turned her face toward the window as if the night itself might hide her. Tavio didn't rush her. He didn't even look over right away. He just kept driving with that steady patience she remembered from Kelanu, as if he had learned long ago that some pains only ease when given enough silence. When she finally found her voice, it came out in uneven pieces, the story tumbling out of her like something she had carried for too long. She told him about the argument, about the words that cut deeper because they came from people she trusted, about the way the door closed behind her as if she had no place left in that house. She tried to explain how she must have said something wrong, how maybe she should have kept quiet, how the fault must be hers somehow. Tavio let out a soft laugh, not mocking, just warm and familiar, the kind that reminded her of mango season jokes and long afternoons by the Kelanu riverbank. He told her she had always taken the weight of the whole world even when it wasn't hers to carry. He said it lightly, but the truth in it made her chest tremble. The road stretched ahead like a slow river of shadows. The headlights washed over patches of tall grass, and every now and then a firefly danced close to the windshield, glowing for only a heartbeat before disappearing again. Sira wiped her cheeks and tried to breathe normally. She hadn't realized how starved she was for simple kindness until this moment. Tavio finally glanced at her, his eyes soft, steady, the same eyes that once made her brave enough to climb the old fig tree behind her grandmother's house. He told her no one deserved to be thrown out like that, not after giving so much of herself. His voice wasn't loud, but it felt sure, like a hand catching hers before she fell. She felt a tiny laugh escape her, half broken, half relieved, and she wondered how someone who had been gone for years could still understand her better than people she lived with every day. As they drove past the edge of Ralumo, she felt the weight in her chest shift. It didn't disappear, but it loosened, making room for breath. She told him she felt foolish for crying like a child. He shook his head and said he had seen her cry before, and she always rose stronger afterward. She couldn't help smiling at that, remembering the day she lost the foot race to him, and pretended it didn't hurt until he found her behind the granary wiping her face. He had said something similar then, and it was strange how those old moments felt closer than the home she had just left. The car hummed on, and the town lights faded behind them. Sira leaned back into the seat, feeling her heartbeat slow for the first time all evening. She didn't know what waited for her in Mavari or anywhere else, but sitting beside someone who knew her past and didn't judge her present felt like finding a small shelter in a storm. She looked at Tavio and whispered thank you, not for the ride, but for reminding her she still mattered. And as the wind slipped through the half-open window, she felt something inside her begin to mend, one quiet breath at a time. Mavari came into view like a quiet dream, its lantern lights floating above the river as if the whole town was breathing in soft gold. Sira felt her body sink deeper into the seat as they crossed the small bridge, the water beneath them moving slow and peaceful, nothing like the storm inside her. Tavio drove as if he was guiding her toward a memory she had forgotten she needed. When they reached his home, a modest house tucked behind a row of river palms, his sister Limo stepped out before they even knocked. She took one look at Sira, offered a warm smile, and opened her arms in welcome without asking a single question. It was the kind of kindness that catches you off guard, the kind that makes your knees feel weak because you didn't realize how empty you were until someone filled the space with simple care. Limo wrapped her in a soft blanket that smelled faintly of hibiscus, placed a bowl of warm soup in her hands, and guided her inside as though she were an old friend returning after a long journey. Sira sat near the window while she ate, letting the warmth travel slowly through her body. The quiet inside the house felt different from the quiet on the road. This silence didn't judge. It didn't push. It held her gently. Tavio sat across from her, leaning back in his chair, watching her with a small smile that held no pressure, only relief that she was safe. Every now and then he made a light comment about how Limo still cooked enough soup to feed half of Mavari, and Limo would swat his arm and laugh, and Sira found herself laughing too, soft at first, then freely, almost surprised at the sound coming out of her. For a moment she felt like the girl she used to be, the one who believed life had room for joy even on the hardest days. When the bowl was empty and her eyes felt heavy, she slipped outside to the small veranda, letting the night air touch her face. The river shimmered in the moonlight, silver and calm, moving in a way that made everything else feel slower and kinder. Sira leaned on the wooden rail and watched the reflections tremble on the surface. She thought about the home she had tried to build, the one that had shut her out so quickly. She thought about all the ways she had tried to fit into a life that kept shrinking around her. Standing by the river, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, she realized how far she had drifted from herself. She wondered why she had stayed so long in a place that didn't hold her gently, why she had silenced her own voice to keep a peace that was never hers. A small laugh escaped her, soft and sad at the same time because she finally saw it clearly. She hadn't been living. She had been trying not to break. Behind her, she heard Tavio step onto the veranda, his footsteps slow. He didn't speak right away. He just stood beside her looking at the same river. The quiet between them felt easy, safe. Sira breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill her chest. For the first time in years, she felt a shift inside her, a small but steady certainty that she didn't have to return to who she had been before. She could move toward something new, something honest, something hers. And as the lantern lights of Mavari flickered gently across the water, Sira felt her direction change, not by force, but by finally choosing herself. Morning settled gently over Mavari, the kind of morning that feels soft on the skin, warm but not loud. Sira woke to the smell of fresh porridge and the sound of limo humming somewhere in the kitchen. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and then everything returned at once but without the sharp edge. She stretched slowly, feeling both heavy and rested, a strange mix she hadn't felt in years. When she walked outside to the small table under the palm tree, Tavio was already there, stirring his cup and pretending not to watch her too closely. He asked if she slept well, and she nodded with a smile that felt new on her face. They ate quietly at first, the river behind them moving with its lazy morning rhythm. Limo joked about how Sira should stay longer just to taste all the dishes she planned to cook. Sira laughed, wiping a crumb off her lip, but part of her knew the joke carried a truth she wasn't ready to touch yet. When Limo went inside to fetch more tea, Tavio leaned forward, elbows on the table, and asked her in a calm voice what she wanted now. Not what she thought she was supposed to do, not what someone else expected, but what her own heart was asking for. His words hung in the air so gently that they felt heavier than shouting. Sira tried to answer quickly, the way she always did. She opened her mouth, ready to list all the things she felt responsible for, all the reasons she should go back and fix things, all the expectations that had shaped her life for so long. But nothing came out. Instead, she felt a lump rising in her throat. She set her spoon down and took a slow breath, staring at the steam from her cup as if it could guide her. She realized she had been making choices for years based on fear, duty, and the need to keep everyone else comfortable. Her heart had been whispering, and she had been pushing it aside, telling herself she didn't deserve more than what she already had. Tavio didn't look away. He just waited, patient as always, like he had all the time in the world for her answer. When she finally found her voice, it came out small and shaky. She said she didn't know what she wanted, but she knew she wanted something different from the life she was running back to. She said she wanted to feel like herself again. As soon as the words left her mouth, the tears followed. Not the hard, painful tears from the night before. These were lighter, almost warm, as if they had been sitting quietly behind her eyes waiting for permission to fall. She covered her face and let out a tiny laugh between the tears. It felt ridiculous to be crying over breakfast, but somehow it also felt right. She told Tavio she felt fragile and free at the same time, like someone loosening a knot that had been tight for too long. He reached across the table and gently tapped her hand, not to pull her together, but to remind her she wasn't alone. The river shimmered behind them in the growing sunlight, and Sira felt the morning open around her like a path she had never seen before. In that quiet moment, she understood that the truth she finally spoke wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the life she had been too afraid to claim. The road back to Ralumo felt different this time, not heavy the way it had felt the night she walked alone, but steady, almost calm. Sira sat beside Tavio in the quiet car, watching the field slide past like long green ribbons. Her hands were folded in her lap, holding nothing but her own resolve. Tavio didn't say much, only glanced at her now and then, as if making sure she was still breathing evenly. She gave him a small smile each time, the kind that says I'm scared but I'm ready. When they reached the edge of the compound, she felt her chest tighten, but not in the old way. This time it felt like she was walking toward the last locked door of her old life, ready to close it with her own hand. Tavio stopped the car and told her he'd wait. She nodded and stepped out, the dust rising gently around her feet. The air smelled of morning sun and leftover charcoal from someone's early cooking fire. She walked through the open gate, her back straight, her heart beating fast but not wild. The family was gathered in the yard as if they had sensed her arrival. Their faces froze when they saw her, a mix of surprise and the kind of guilt people don't admit out loud. Sira felt the old pain stir, but it didn't take over. She greeted them softly, her voice calm, and asked for only a moment. No one replied, but they listened. She told them she wasn't there to argue or defend herself. She thanked them for the days when they treated her kindly, for the meals shared, for the small moments that once made her believe she belonged. Then she slipped the ring from her finger. Her hand didn't shake. She placed it gently on the wooden table between them. One of them opened their mouth, maybe to call her back or to explain something that no longer mattered, but she lifted her hand slightly, not to silence them with anger but with quiet certainty. She told them she wished them well. Her voice didn't break once. There was no bitterness, just a clear honesty she had been afraid to use for too long. They stared at her like they were seeing someone new, someone they couldn't control or wound anymore. For a moment the whole compound felt still, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what she would do next. Sira gave a small, almost sad smile, then turned around. Each step away felt lighter, as if she was walking out of a shell she had outgrown. When she reached the gate again, Tavio was leaning against the car, watching her with a look that wasn't pride or sympathy, but something gentler, something like respect. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and laughed softly, a shaky but real sound. She climbed into the car, and as they drove away, the weight on her shoulders finally loosened. She hadn't run this time. She hadn't been pushed. She had walked out because she chose herself. And in that simple, powerful choice, she felt the world open in front of her like a bright road she could finally claim. The road from Ralumo to Mavari looked warmer than it had the night she first walked it, as if the sun had decided to shine a little brighter just for her. Sira leaned her head against the window, watching the tall grass sway in long, easy waves, and for the first time in a long while she felt something close to peace. It began as a small flutter in her chest, then grew into a lightness that surprised her so much she let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that hides pain. It was soft and real, the kind that escaped from a place finally allowed to breathe. Tavio glanced at her with that familiar half-smile, the one that always looked like he was remembering the girl she used to be and seeing the woman she was becoming. She laughed again, louder this time, until her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to wipe away. She told him she felt ridiculous for laughing after everything, and he shook his head and said it was about time she let her heart stretch its legs. As the fields rolled by, Sira thought about the night she had been thrown out, how broken she felt, how lost she was on that dark road. She imagined her old self still standing there, shaking and confused, and she wished she could tell that girl that it wasn't the ending she feared. It was the door she needed to walk through. She looked at Tavio, at the open road, at the bright sky, and she felt something settle inside her, something strong and simple. She realized the car that stopped beside her that night didn't just rescue her from the dark. It led her back to the person she had been slowly losing. Mavari waited ahead, quiet and glowing by the river, and Sira knew the next part of her life would start there, not because someone saved her, but because she finally chose to return to herself.